So now we'll move on to chapter 6, sexual arousal and response. And so that response means physiological response. The easiest way to, hold on real quick. The easiest way to think about this would be just a very typical sort of sexual encounter. Man and woman in the bedroom having sex, what happens physiologically during that time. But it's not just limited to understanding it in that way. It can be, masturbation and all the same response. Physiological response, of course, is the same for sex with a same-sex partner and things like that. Another random little fun sex fact here is kind of weird, but the Velociraptor in Jurassic Park, if you haven't seen that movie, you should. It's quite interesting. Was actually a recording of these turtles having sex, this specific type of tortoise. So yeah, they make interesting sounds that are quite intimidating and whatnot during sex. Don't have to remember that. That's why it's a fun sex fact. Alright, so what we're going to cover now, I'm going to attempt to cover for the rest of this week, will be Masters and Johnson's findings. So remember, those are the couple who observed, I think it's about 10,000 episodes of people either having sex or masturbating and things like that. And then they hook these people up to different physiological markers and basically measured arousal throughout the process of sex. So we're really going to focus on that a lot, and we're going to use Masters and Johnson's findings as kind of our way to understand things like the orgasm and arousal in general, but it'll be couched in Masters and Johnson's findings. I think throughout I'll be clear, when we start to deviate into other research versus what exactly were Masters and Johnson's findings. So the physiological reactions to sexual arousal, and we'll talk about orgasm a lot. And then we'll also talk about later theories about sexual arousal, the sexual experience, physiological reactions. We'll talk about a few other theories briefly as well. So that's really going to be our focus and what I want you guys to absorb the most from the lecture. But we're also going to touch on the brain, neurotransmitters, and things like that as far as sex goes, sexual physiological response and whatnot. And also talk about the 5 senses, so taste, touch, smell, and touch, and whatever I didn't mention, and how they play a role in arousal. So I'm going to try to keep this interesting. A lot of it will kind of be basic and physiological, like talking about blood pressure rising when engaging in sexual intercourse and things like that. So, if you're very experienced in masturbation or sex with another partner and things like that, I think a lot of what we're going to go over today, you're like, well, yeah, men get erections when they have sex and whatnot. But at the same time, this is still good to go over because a lot of people could, engage in sexual activity a lot and not necessarily notice all the changes that we're going to be talking about today. And looking ahead, you can kind of think about these things that we're going to talk about. Like I said, blood pressure, nipples becoming erect, different things like that. You can think about those sort of things in terms of mindfulness. So a lot of Masters and Johnson's findings were used for sex therapy, and a lot of it was sensate focused therapy, kind of laying with one's partner and just kind of like cuddling and touching and feeling and things like that. So I don't want you guys to come away today with the impression of just like, oh, this is what the body does when it has sex. There's also, paying attention to that moment-to-moment detail of how the body is changing throughout sex. That could be arousing in and of itself as well. Check this video out. I think that if you watch this first, it's not too long, about 5 minutes, that'll really help you understand the rest of the lecture really well. It goes hand in hand together. Alright, so Masters and Johnson. I found another video about them that I want you guys to watch. And so the positive side of these people is that, this was the first time in probably recorded history where scientists got people to come into the laboratory, engage in sexual behaviors, in the first opportunity to really see step by step are the commonalities between people in how they react physiologically to the sexual encounter. So kudos to them. That's great and helpful for people just to know, what's the average, you could say normal sexual response and whatnot. So that was good. But a couple of things that are a little things for us to talk about is one, Johnson, Masters. I forgot his first name, but Masters, as you'll watch in this YouTube video, seemed to be, a little more motivated to stimulate himself sexually than he was in this sort of innocent scientist sort of thing. So I question whether he was like completely objective about wanting to really get close and understand the human sexual response. Things like basically saying to Johnson, let's have sex so we can really understand the human's physiological response and things like that. So that sort of harassment is kind of, questionable on like, what is this like guy's intention with things. And then I don't think this was based on really any research, but he came out with a book, Masters did a little bit after the main research that we're going to talk about, and saying that conversion therapy, so taking people who are attracted to the same sex, he said that he could make them be attracted to the opposite sex. And we know definitively that that's just not true, that that therapy doesn't work and is quite damaging to people. So, his I guess his only no, we'll just leave it at that. And but a really good show is Masters of Sex, and that seems to be really well done, and it gives you a closer glimpse at these people who are pretty interesting to us. So check that YouTube video out. Let's see. Let me check our time here. So we're starting up again here. Still talking about Masters and Johnson and their specific findings as far as physiological arousal and sexual response. So we're going to talk about things in terms of how they wrote the results. They wrote a book on men and then wrote a book on women. So that's kind of how their studies kind of go. So we'll go through, what are the physiological reactions that are common to both men and women, and then we'll talk about, I think we talk about men first, and then we'll talk about women specifically. So what's kind of more specific to men about physiological response, and then what's more common to women specifically as far as physiological response. So vasocongestion, and I think we talked about this at least once already. That's basically blood movement to the genital area. It's not just limited to that, it's any blood movement. So a lot of times it can go to the skin and in the face or chest and things like that, and so you'll see a reddening called a sex flush. And as vasocongestion, we're mostly interested in the blood flow that comes to the penis or the vagina, and how both of the genitals become bigger during arousal. So before arousal, as far as the vagina and the penis, there's blood flowing in and out, and the pace at which it flows in and out remains the same, but then the more aroused one becomes, and then we'll talk about at orgasm, would be the highest point as far as blood going to the genitals. So during arousal, more blood is coming in than is coming out, typically, when one is not aroused sexually. And so this is also blood engorgement with the clitoris, and then we'll talk specifically about the clitoris in a few today. And then lubrication of the vagina also occurs during that time. So measuring arousal for men as far as physiological measurements, we've talked about the penile strain gauge that you can put over a penis, and then based on how big it gets, it's a proxy for arousal. The bigger the gauge gets, the bigger the penis is getting, and therefore the more aroused the person is in theory. But it's not always necessarily the case. And then measuring arousal physiologically for women is with the photoplasmograph that measures the secretions within the vagina and blood flow, engorgement. So another physiological response other than vasocongestion is myotonia, and you may or may not have noticed this as much as things like vasocongestion, but it's through the process of sex. And remember, when I say sex, I mean it can also be masturbation too, and just keep that in mind. So increased muscle tension throughout the body And this is can be either voluntary or involuntary, like feeling the urge to clench one's fist, or any other sort of more voluntary tension in the body during arousal, but also some involuntary contractions as well happen during this time, especially during orgasm. A lot of people, make weird faces or whatever. Things happen to our bodies that we're not necessarily so in control of. Myotonia, that muscle tension in specific places. All right, so here is the one of the most important slides that we're going to talk about that kind of shapes a lot of what we're talking about today. So Masters and Johnson did their 10,000 observations of people having sex, masturbating, blah, 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 and then came up with these conclusions that for men and women during the sexual encounter, having sex, there's an excitement phase, a plateau phase, orgasm phase, and resolution phase. Now this diagram here is for men, but it gets the point across easier because this graph is a lot easier to understand than the ones for females, and we'll get to why that is in a second. But there's an excitement phase where arousal increases at the beginning. There's a phase during sex where there's more plateau, so not many changes. Arousal is not necessarily increasing, but one is still very aroused during the plateau stage. There becomes even more arousal during the orgasm phase, and then often, a resolution after that. And we'll talk about the resolution. That one's a little more tricky and variable. Okay, so we're going to talk about each of those phases. Each of these 4 phases, excitement, plateau, orgasm, resolution, we're going to talk about them, how they're similar, in what ways they're similar. So what way is excitement similar? How do men and women both react during the excitement phase? We're going to talk about men and women together, and then we're going to break it down into women and men specifically, how each is excited, how each plateaus, how each orgasms. So we have that increase in myotonia. This is the very beginning, if you're imagining like a couple having sex. So this would be either when a couple is flirting or something like that, or just the general foreplay and whatnot in a sexual encounter, starting to a lot of what Masters and Johnson found, that during this phase that a lot of people had a lot of muscle tension in various areas, and like we said, it's either voluntary or involuntary. Increase in heart rate during this phase. I think that's one of the main physiological markers that a lot of people can probably feel during this, and or when one's breathing becomes quicker as well during this. So increase in blood pressure happens during this time as well. I mentioned the sex flush, where it's like vasocongestion just for your skin. So more blood coming to your skin. So that's why some people redden during sex. And nipple erections for men and women, but mostly for women. But some men have erect nipples during the excitement phase. Okay, so that was the excitement phase. And we'll move to plateau phase. What is the plateau phase like for men and women both? So myotonia becomes more pronounced, more of the involuntary. So this is pretty high sexual arousal once you're at the plateau phase. That sexual, the muscle tension and whatnot becomes more apparent. Involuntary muscle contractions, like we've talked about, it can happen in really anywhere in the body, but especially the hands and feet. Heart rate increases even further during this time. Blood pressure increases even further this time, and pace of breathing hastens, quickens. Okay, so how is orgasm similar for both the men and women, according to Masters and Johnson's findings? That muscle tension becomes even more pronounced, and like actually during an actual orgasm, a lot of people tense up their muscles during this time. The heart rate increases even further than it was in the plateau, than it was during excitement. Blood pressure increases even further than when it was during the plateau phase or the excitement phase. So it was very high at this point, and pace of breathing continues to increase. Masters and Johnson kind of found it a bit difficult to really make much sense of orgasms. Obviously, most people report them being pleasurable and things like that, but there wasn't much of a way to be like, they knew with different muscle contractions there may be an orgasm and whatnot, but it was still hard to like really get in the minds of these people and know what the experience of the orgasm was like. And then finally, resolution. Eventually, all women come to a resolution, and then most men come into a resolution sooner than women. Heart rate returns to normal. Blood pressure begins returning to normal back to what it was before the excitement phase. Pace of breathing returns to normal. Sex flush disappears. So all these things that changed during the arousal all the way up to the orgasm and whatnot, it disappears basically. Nipple erection subsides and all that. So that was the excitement, plateau, orgasm, resolution for men and women, both. So let's look at men's sexual response first. Now I chose men to look at first because it's simpler to understand. Has less nuance than women's sexual response, according to Masters and Johnson. Okay. So we kind of already talked about this a lot today when we covered chapter 4. So this is specific to men. So the arousal during the excitement phase. Remember, all the phases: excitement, plateau, orgasm, and resolution. Remember those. You may want to write that down just so you can have a little reference while I'm talking about this. So excitement phase for men. Have that corpora cavernosa. Remember this whole area here and here. And then the spongiosum, this area here, all engorged with blood. And if we were in class right now, I would ask the whole class, so this engorgement with blood, what is that called again? And y'all would say vasocongestion. So, And during the excitement phase, blood starts to fill the penis. So this is probably a bit too erect for the excitement phase, you could say. Colloquially, people call things like semi erection. So this vasocongestion is occurring, is starting to flow more in than out, and we'll see that more pronounced later. Alright, the plateau phase for men. Oh no, I don't have a drink. Plateau phase for men can be quick. They can just, I love these diagrams. They're very helpful. So the plateau phase, remember this is arousal right here. The more aroused you get over time during the sexual encounter, during this plateau phase, it can be very quick. So this plateau phase could be just from like here to here and then with the orgasm, or the plateau phase could be super long depending on the encounter or whatever, and then the orgasm. So you can't really say like the plateau phase lasts 1 minute or whatever like that. It just depends on the sexual encounter or masturbation session or whatever you want to call it. Let's look at one qualitative response to the question of what is it like to plateau. Where's my book? Okay. 175. So this is from a man during the plateau phase, his description of it. And when I get up there almost on the verge of coming, I try to hang in as long as possible. If my partner cooperates, stopping or slowing when necessary, I can stay right on the edge for several minutes, sometimes even longer. I know that all it would take is one more stroke and I'm over the top. Sometimes my whole body gets to shaking and quivering, and I can feel incredible sensations shooting through me like electric charges. The longer I can make this supercharged period last, the better the orgasm. So you can kind of hear in that qualitative response of someone talking about plateau is that in a way it can be a little frustrating because you want to get to that orgasm release and endorphins and all that sort of stuff. But there's also this ability to stay in the plateau phase where you're highly aroused and whatnot. So the diameter of the penis further increases. It was a little bit engorged with blood, starting to become bigger than completely unaroused, but now it becomes even bigger, more blood coming into the penis. The testicles even become more engorged with blood. So vasocongestion is just happening all over the place here, and increasing in size from about 50% to about 50% bigger than that. And elevates, comes closer into the body. So during this time in the plateau stage, so hasn't orgasm, hasn't come yet, ejaculated, the Cowper's gland can and does secrete a few drops of clear fluid. This does have sperm in it, and so that's why a lot of people say, withdrawal is not a very good method. One, because a lot of people don't actually withdraw, but two, even if you did withdraw from the ejaculation, still the secretions from the Cowper's gland can result in pregnancy. Just a little tidbit there. Heart rate, blood pressure, breathing still continues to increase. All right, orgasm. Involuntary muscle spasms throughout the body, so that myotonia, blood pressure increasing all the way to maximum during this orgasm, the climax of it all. Just a few seconds, typically for men. So there are two stages to the orgasm. You have the emission and the expulsion phase. Expulsion is a little easier to understand. That's when the actual ejaculation comes out of the penis, and that occurs because of contractions of the urethra muscles. Forces the semen out of the penis. But before that, let me see if I have a picture here. I hope I do. No, I don't. Sorry. Rhythmic muscular contractions inside the penis area. This is during the emission phase, and forces the sperm into the ejaculatory ducts. So it's kind of like this preparation. And during the emission phase, you have this ejaculatory inevitability, like it's going to happen. This is the precursor to the expulsion and the ejaculation. Emission occurs where you're going to expel. And so knowing kind of like where you are is really important for what we'll talk about premature ejaculation at some point in the semester during sexual difficulties. And so this is a big difference that we'll see between men and women. So 85% of men, according to your book, experienced an orgasm during their last sexual encounter. That may be even a little bit underestimated. Typically, it's easier for men to achieve an orgasm than women. Okay, so this is, like I said, most of all of what we're talking about today is Masters and Johnson's findings. So we're staying within that, but we're going to go take a little tangent here. Can men have multiple orgasms? We're going to talk about women as well, but we'll start with men. So we'll talk about a dry orgasm where, you could read this book, The Multi-Orgasmic Man. It's written in multiple languages and all that sort of stuff. Being able to figure out how to have an orgasm without ejaculating. So a dry orgasm, being able to have an orgasm, is the ejaculation that really leads to, that resolution phase with the arousal going down. So is it possible for men to be highly aroused, have an orgasm, and then be able to still continue being aroused? So this hasn't been documented that this is possible for men, but many men report being able to do this, and it's not necessarily all that common. Alright, so the refractory period. So all of this is pretty easy to understand. Excitement phase, that blood pressure and the vasocongestion, things like that. And then plateau, which can last anywhere from just like a second to, hours, depending on the person. The plateau part of it. The orgasm. And so we have the refractory period right here. So let's take Bob, for example. Bob's really excited, getting to the plateau. He has an orgasm. And then he's like, you know what? I'd like to try to have another orgasm. So this is someone who has ejaculated. So he ejaculates at this orgasm, and then he needs a little bit of time, the refractory period, before he can start going again, engaging in foreplay or whatever, and comes up again and is able to have another orgasm. So most men are not able to ejaculate and then just ejaculate again. There's this refractory period where the body has to kind of like recuperate before going again. Refractory period. Then the resolution. So there's even a fancy word for going from an erection to losing the erection after arousal, after orgasm, detumescence. And so the blood flow, where so much was coming in and less was coming out, now a lot more is coming out and less coming in, returning back to normal size of the penis. Same with the testicles, they become smaller and go away from the body. A lot of people talk about blue balls and things like that, so a lot of men, if they're highly aroused but then they don't ejaculate, yes, it can cause discomfort, but it's not dangerous to experience that. A little tidbit there. Refractory period. So let's go back and look at that graph. So the refractory period, let's say Bob is 80 years old. So this refractory period, how long, so we would be looking at it from like here to here. Depending on one's age, it may take even longer, even all the way out here or something like that, like an hour, to be able to get back to arousal with the plateau and achieve another orgasm. So it's not a fixed amount of time that the refractory period is, and the refractory period, each successive orgasm, so let's say a man has an orgasm at 6 o'clock or whatever, 6 p.m. and then at 6:05 they have another orgasm. Most likely it's not going to be at 6:10 that this guy can have another orgasm. It may be more like 6:20, then 7 o'clock. So after each successive orgasm, it takes longer to achieve that again. And the older the man is, the longer it takes to recover this refractory period and whatnot. So let's move on to women's sexual response, and just a couple ideas I want to get out while we're out there. I don't want this lecture to feel like this is the healthy and normal sort of way to have sex. Like it must start with excitement and gradually build up, and then you have an orgasm, and then you relax after that, and then that's just the way it is. You know, there's a lot more variability within that, but I think talking about the women's sexual response really will kind of get at that as well. A lot of our society is pretty orgasm obsessed. I mean, it kind of makes sense because it does feel so good and whatnot, but kind of thinking, you know, the sex is all about trying to achieve that orgasm. And, you know, I think especially by the end of this class, I think that you'll question whether that's necessarily true, especially, you know, for men, many men feeling as though they have to have an orgasm to be satisfied with their sexual encounter. You know, it just depends on the person. And another thing, so I tried to get, I looked on YouTube for different good videos on women's sexual response, you know, talked about from a woman. I definitely don't want a lot of you to think that, you know, I'm a man here telling you like how your body responds sexually. So know that I'm mostly, you know, I'm giving the results from Masters and Johnson's studies, basically. Alright, so you can already see right here that it's a bit more complicated. So look at, let's do the easiest one first for me is B. Let's look at B, that one's red. So she's excited, got the vasocongestion going on, lubrication, blah blah blah, plateau, and then look at that. She stays at the plateau phase, doesn't have an orgasm, and then resolution. You know, not everyone has to have an orgasm every time they, you know, men and women, every time they have sex to have a good sexual encounter. And it's very normal for a lot of women to stay at that plateau phase and then resolve that way. Very different. Let's look at C. Quick arousal. Through excitement skyrockets to the plateau phase. There's basically not even a plateau phase here, all the way to orgasm and a sharp resolution. So this could be like a quickie. And then A, where it is blue, let's look at this. So this particular woman getting excited, getting to the plateau phase. She has this phase where not much changes occur, but she's aroused, plateau, has an orgasm, comes back down to the plateau phase, and then is able to have another orgasm after that, and then fully goes into a resolution. And so we'll talk more in depth about each of those, especially the blue one, A, as we go along. Alright, so like I said, we did women's and men's sexual response to excitement, plateau, orgasm, and resolution. Then we did men's. Now we're doing women's specifically. What is women's sexual response that Masters and Johnson found during the excitement phase? So myotonia, the muscle contractions, involuntary and voluntary during this beginning phase. I kind of think of the excitement phase as a little bit like around like foreplay or watching pornography or something like that. So that sex flush coming out could be on the chest or face, reddening there, the vasocongestion of the actual in the skin. In excitement, that first going up phase can last just a minute, like we saw with the tan letter C. That was very quick excitement that moved all the way through plateau and arousal, or it could be several hours of just a slow increase that goes for a long time, depending on the person and the encounter. Vasocongestive response, we've talked a lot about that already. So the vaginal walls becoming engorged with blood, and that pressure from the engorgement cause the walls to secrete fluids. The walls of the vagina balloon out, and then the cervix pulls up a little bit. Labia majora flattens and moves apart. Clitoris becomes engorged with blood and increases in diameter. You have increase in heart rate and blood pressure, and during this time, as we've already talked about, with oftentimes nipple erections for some. Outer third of the vagina becomes engorged with blood and swells during the plateau phase. So this is even more engorgement during this time. And this is the outer third of the vagina, not very deep into the vagina. The outer third becoming more and more engorged with blood during the plateau phase. This is called the orgasmic platform. Good to know. And then the vaginal opening actually narrows 30 to 50% during this phase. Clitoris pulls back against the pubic bone and kind of comes beneath the clitoral hood during this time. The breast engorged with blood. I meant so many things engorged with blood during sexual arousal and whatnot. So breast swelling and areola as well, the area around the nipple on the breasts. And secretion of fluid from the vaginal walls, just like during the excitement phase. This may slow down a little bit if you had like an hour-long plateau phase. It's not like necessarily more and more secretions of fluids happen during that time. It may slow down. Alright, so orgasm. So that orgasmic platform, we have the outer third of the vagina becoming engorged with blood and swells. I think I might have made a mistake. Just during this time in the orgasm, the muscles of the vagina contract rhythmically 3 to 15 times, approximately. Uterine contractions can occur during an orgasm. Clitoris remains under the hood during that time. No further changes to the breast or nipples during orgasm. And but we'll talk a little more about women's orgasm. Ma and Bennick in 2002 found that the experience of an orgasm is quite, for men and for women, is quite similar in experience. So this is a reading of an orgasm from a woman. Right, this is like at the very end of the plateau phase, just about to hit the orgasm phase. When I'm about to reach orgasm, my face feels very hot. I close my eyes and open my mouth. It centers in my clitoris, and it feels like electric wires igniting from there and radiating up my torso and down my legs to my feet. I sometimes feel like I need to urinate. My vagina contracts anywhere from 5 to 12 times. My vulva area feels heavy and swollen. There isn't another feeling like it. It's fantastic. So, describing her orgasm. Orgasm can look like many different things to many different women. A lot of what we talked about holds the same, but maybe achieving the orgasm may come from, different ways of stimulation. But physiologically, for the most part, it's pretty similar. Just looking at a little few statistics here, about 15% of women have multiple orgasms. And as many as 40% of women have experienced a multiple orgasm at least some point in their life. So about 15%, they say they report regularly that they have multiple orgasms, but just looking at women in general, about 40% will be like, yeah, I had an orgasm, and then pretty soon after that had another orgasm. As many as 10% of sexually experienced women have never experienced an orgasm. A lot of this has to do with, some women, just like men, are asexual, so they don't really have a desire to do all this sort of stuff. But then, a lot of times, women may be with partners who aren't very sensitive to building them up and whatnot as far as their arousal goes. So there's a couple different explanations of why about 10% of even sexually experienced women never experiencing an orgasm. Mostly, due to partners who don't try a variety of methods like vibrators or oral, vaginal sex and things like that. And only about we already had that stat, sorry. That's two repetitive things there, sorry. And so just looking at surveying a bunch of women and saying, recall back to your last sexual encounter that you had with your lover, and say, did you experience an orgasm during this time? Only about 60% of women said, yes, I experienced an orgasm during that encounter, and then 40% of the women said, no, I didn't have that orgasm. So it's like that one woman who went up to the plateau phase, stayed there, and then went down. We just talked about this, more likely to experience orgasms with a variety of sex acts. So just getting right to it, penile-vaginal intercourse isn't necessarily going to lead to an orgasm, but if a woman's partner is willing to, please her in a variety of different ways, like I mentioned, vibrators or oral stimulation or manual stimulation with a finger and things like that, in the way that the particular woman likes to be pleasured, that's more likely to lead to the orgasm. may experience plateau without an orgasm. We said that. So subjectively, as far as the pleasure part of orgasms go, men and women describe the experience of an orgasm pretty similarly. One study that's been done is that they had men and women write down what their experience was like having an orgasm, separated them to men and women, and then had physicians and psychologists. They had the narrative, but they didn't have the sex of the person, and they had to try to guess, was this a man or was this a woman having an orgasm? And they were basically unable to tell with much validity. Another little fun sex fact of the day here, and this goes back to a little bit of our conversation with theology, especially Christian theology. A lot of theologians have written before how the vagina is for receiving the sperm to have a baby, so women are designed to reproduce, and that is what sex is for. But it's interesting to note, as far as just physiology goes, is that the clitoris is right here, is designed for bringing a woman pleasure. And so, arguably, that's its purpose, is to bring pleasure, which could, lead to just bonding between the two people, or just that general, the good that comes out of having pleasure, intense pleasure in that way. So it's not just, I think that some of the theologians have missed before some of what we now know about the clitoris today.